welcome to today's episode of Off the Crutch. And we are really going to go off the crutch today and flip the host and guest roles. Today, my guest and your host is Michelle Knapp Cooper, who you've met before from a recent episode. Michelle is a retired 35-year corporate executive who now runs a successful career coaching business called The Map Co. Now, her idea was to interview me today on the topic of how to build a network. And so I'm going to give Michelle the floor and let her be the guide today.
Thanks, Travis. Yeah, I think I've been most impressed with a lot of things about you, Travis, but your ability to build connection and networks to me is unmatched. And so I think this information will be super valuable, especially for kiddos coming up and starting their careers to really understand a little bit about what are networks, how do you build them, how do you maintain them, etc. So I know your listeners know you well, but we might have some first timers here. So if you just want to start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your background and how networking has played a role for you so far, I think we can start there.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really great opportunity for my listeners to get a different side of me because when I started the podcast, right away it had to do with disability. And I think that this is, again, an opportunity for the listeners to get some really good knowledge about how I've been able to navigate throughout my life in a really intentional way to build connections. I've been in the disability community for quite some time and moving around quite a bit from Albuquerque to college in California twice, and then Arizona. And then now with this direction of moving to Austin, which has been up to this point very fulfilling to meet people for the first time, make connections online, mostly through LinkedIn, and have opportunities like this to not only get to know you virtually, but to have had the opportunity to meet you in person and now you being on my podcast. And so I think networking is really the root of not only building relationships personally, but also in a career and professional setting, because you can have all the knowledge for a career, but it's really who you know that can either get you in the door or create a job that may not exist. And in my experience, I've had opportunities where jobs didn't exist. And it just so happened that the people that I know and knew created those opportunities for me. But it took my ability of reaching out and making those conversations for that to happen.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about LinkedIn, but so for basics, for people that are they haven't really started, how would you define a network? What does that mean? That word necessarily mean?
I think the network in some capacity is your net worth, and it's the social capital in which you're building your foundation on relationships and career. And I say social capital because a lot of times people equate like success to monetary capital. But when you break it down, how do people get to that point where they're making a lot of money? It has to do with the relationships that are being built because people are the ones that will create opportunities or they will offer you a job because we can create opportunities, but there is a two-way street of the person and then the other person. And so I think network to me is when you are being intentional with other people and developing a relationship that at the crux is a win-win situation.
I love that. Redefining network as net worth. That's awesome. Because I think you're right. I think as humans, we're social beings, and you can't make it through this life without having people around to help and for you to help them, right? So I love the idea of win-win as well. So I know in the age of social media, people think in terms of number of connections, number of followers, but for you, is it a balance of quality and quantity? Is it more about quality? Is it more about quantity? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it depends on the platform. And I think having the podcast also, it's layered because, yeah, I would love to have X amount of listeners only to then share my message. But when you look at Instagram or LinkedIn, which are apples to oranges, usually because you're not attracting clients or buyers on Instagram. You can, but that's not primarily what the platform is designed for, at least not originally. So I always like to be intentional with the people that I'm connecting with, but I also know that every connection is not necessarily going to benefit me. I try to make it so where I can benefit them, but my connections I don't look at as just for me. It could be for somebody else that I know. So I may have a large quantity, but at the heart of it, I value quality over quantity.
Gotcha. You're not just blindly saying yes to every single person that reaches out. And yeah, yeah. Because I know at one point people are like, oh, I have all these Facebook friends, that word friends, and it's what's the quality of that relationship? So if I'm just starting out, and especially if I have a disability, and how do I work up the courage to talk to strangers, either digitally or in person? Like, how do you find that source of strength to make connections from nothing, really?
From an early stage of life, growing up, I've always had some type of attention on me. And that was just magnified because of my disability. And as I got older, I realized that I could turn that experience or that attention into something positive.
Mm.
And I think having a disability can really benefit somebody to be a successful networker because let's face it, you're already getting attention. So let's then figure out how to use that attention into something positive instead of it eroding your mental state of people's perceptions of you. Easier said than done, I know, but I think that once you have that mindset of this disability is not going to hold me down, and let's figure out how I can double down on what my personality is to then become a successful networker.
And have you had, this is not really a question we talked about beforehand, but it just made me think of this when you were talking. Have you had a bad experience when you've reached out to somebody you didn't know? I think people are more afraid of what they think
Yeah.
reality is, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think now on the spot of
Sorry.
bad. No, this is good. I think online, it's been, I think it can be harder because not, you're not known. So if an unknown is trying to connect with somebody, just like cold calling, that can be, I mean, there are times where I've reached out to people on messages and I just get nothing, which that's the other thing is you don't want to take anything personal. So Yeah, I've had experiences where that hasn't materialized like I hoped. But when it comes to meeting somebody in person, usually it's been good interactions because you see the, yeah. So, like, an interesting kind of dynamic to look at is if you have a disability and you're reaching out to people virtually, the other person may not know that you have a disability, right? But if you're reaching out to them in person, then the other person will see that you have a disability. And that's when all these biases can come into play, and that might change somebody's perception of you. I think, yeah, I think the negative experiences had more to do with being in person than online.
Interesting, because I would think it'd be hard to be negative with someone in person, but you're right about the bias coming in just because we all have it. And it's some people don't recognize that they have it. All of us have our biases. But back to the fear should be low because generally you would say that the vast majority of your reach outs are end in positive interactions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That leads me to what are some key strategies or actions people can take to start building their network effectively?
I would say to look within your current network. That could be family members or close friends, and maybe jobs that you've had in the past, and then just go out from there because it only really takes one person. I am living proof of that. I am living proof of that. I've been to, like, when I originally went to college for the first time, that was out of state for the first time. That was the first time also that I didn't know a single person, and having to start from scratch was really difficult. But I think if you look within what you already have and know what you're looking for, or like what the purpose is, then it can just really spread very fast, like in my experience. And I've been able to duplicate that a couple times now, where go to a place where I don't know very many people and it's worked out. And I don't think that my situation is could be I think my situation could be the same as other people, but looking within and figuring out what you want and then just slowly build from there. But really, again, look within who you already have, because we all have people in our sphere of influence. And I think that
Yeah.
is really key.
Yeah. That's good. So really start by being bold and asking those around you, who else should you connect with? Yeah, that's good. And I know from my corporate America experience, people talk about mentors, and I always talked about your personal board of directors. You wanted more
Mm,
than one person influencing your career. You really wanted to create that internal network of folks who could help you move your career along. So I think it works both within companies and then externally as well as you're looking to make big transitions, like moving to Austin, that kind of thing. All right, let's see. So let's talk about leveraging LinkedIn and other social media platforms. You talked a little bit about that before, but do you intentionally, do you set time aside to use LinkedIn or like, how are you? And you have, I think it's 30,000 followers or something crazy on LinkedIn. So how did you get to there?
I'll answer the first I'll answer the second question first. It it happened overnight. I remember back in 2018, I had just finished a conference. It was the National ADA Symposium for Americans with Disabilities Act, not the dentist, because there's the ADA for dentistry. I came back and one of the conference organizers sent everybody an Excel spreadsheet of all the people that were there. And at that time, you could upload Excel spreadsheets on LinkedIn and it would just automatically add everybody that was on the spreadsheet that had
Oh,
a
wow.
a LinkedIn account. So, gosh, there was probably a few thousand of those on the list. So I just
Mhm.
uploaded it and that kind of just ballooned everything because I'd say 80% of the people were accepting. So they would just, I had to turn off my notifications because I was just getting pinged all the time. And that was the only time that it just was really a lot. So that then opened up a lot of doors for other people to connect with me because then people saw what I was doing in that space and my experiences. And so then other people outside of that would look and then they would add me and then it just grew and grew. So that's how I got like a jump start on making those connections. And then you go to conferences and other places like where I was just at with South by Southwest, and then back in October of Austin Film Festival and these different places you just meet people and then they find you and you're making connections. So that was how I got mostly how I got to that point. And then to answer your first question of setting time aside, I used to set some time aside, but because I've been traveling, it's disrupted my schedule and getting back into the podcast. But I'd say usually I set some time during the day because that's when usually people are on LinkedIn. So if I need to send them a message or connect with them, they are more likely to respond during the day than in the evening. So I also try to be strategic about how I'm planning those connections because a lot of times people won't add you if there isn't like a message involved or every single time, and I'm not making this up, every single time that I connect with somebody, I send them a message and I just thank them for connecting with me. I don't try to sell them on anything. I don't say we should find a time to connect. It's just a simple thank you. And then I just move on because I'm not expecting anything from anybody when I'm connecting. They can see, hopefully, and maybe we'll go into this, the value that I bring. But yeah, during the day is when I try to set some time aside.
Yeah, that really was my next question. So you've seeded the field, right? You've got the field has got the seeds in it. Now, what do you do to really derive value and give value to the network? How do you feed it and follow up and that kind of thing?
I think my podcast has attributed to that. I know during the pandemic, I was sharing a lot of articles, and that was getting some traction with people. They would see, like, for example, years ago when Morgan's Wonderland, they had an article about the hotels and what they were doing, and people really liked that. And then I would share articles about the importance of hiring people with disabilities in the workforce, and people were resonating with that because I would say a good chunk of my connections aren't in the disability community or field, which is really great because then it opens up their eyes into something that they've never really experienced. So that's really helped with driving people to my site. And what I want to be doing more now is writing articles like you do eloquently on your LinkedIn to let people know who I am and get a better sense of who Travis Davis is and not just some random person that is just adding them and nothing is nurturing. But it is hard. And that's goes to why I want to develop a newsletter because only a fraction of people on my LinkedIn network is seeing my posts just like yours. We have more connections. That just means like more people are seeing it, but then less people are seeing it because there's
Gotcha.
only so much. But so then it becomes, how do I connect with the largest amount of people? And I think one of the great ways to do that is to create like a newsletter or some way that they can stay connected, because you don't want to just close that loop of connection.
Yeah. So you said a few things there that I really liked. One is, what value can you give to those who have connected with you, right? Through your articles, your education, that kind of thing. And then you said a really cool word, which is nourish. And that was my next question around building relationships. So now you have these connections. Some are just transactional. They're just coming, they're just looking at what you're putting, what you're posting. They're just reading that. Some you take to the next level into relationships. How do you go about doing that piece?
I think it is like cliche, but I believe definitely in being intentional and then looking at if there's shared values.
Mm.
And then if I see somebody that I'm interested in chatting with, and I may not see right away the value that they could bring me. First of all, like my default's always like, how can I help the other person, not what I can get out of them. So if I can sell myself to the person of, this is what I can bring to the table, or let me like have an opportunity to have a conversation with you and learn more about your company. I think it definitely starts with the intent, because when you look at the intent, then the other person knows why that connection is starting. But because I have a podcast and I'm doing other things, my intent doesn't necessarily end with, let me learn about your company. It can be, I would like to learn more about your company for an opportunity for you to be on my podcast, or I would like to do a LinkedIn Live with you. So there's different ways in which those connections happen. Now, in the example of Austin, that intent is different because I'm actively trying to understand the community. And so by reaching out to certain people and having those questions, that also allows me to develop those relationships with intent.
Gotcha. So in some cases, you don't really have the end goal in mind. You're just thinking about what's the value that I could bring to this
Mhm.
relation. And then in some cases, you're being very intentional. You have a specific goal. You're reaching out to a network that can support that goal, asking questions, etc. But I also heard you say at the end of the day, you are making an ask. You are asking for whatever that connection is, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because people that connect with me, I get asked a number of things, and it's all like salesy. It's like the opposite of what I do. And I just brush those connections off to the side because nobody likes to be sold. And my asks, I feel, have been from a very intentional and transparent space of just getting to know somebody, or if I really want to be direct, having a question about, I would like to, I haven't asked like specific, I don't know as specific off the top of my head, but I can be very direct and not take time to develop it. And so sometimes people will be open to that and they don't have time to go back and forth. They're just like, okay, ask me what you want to ask me and then we can move on.
Yeah.
It works like that too.
But one of the reasons that when you reached out to me on LinkedIn, one of the reasons I responded was you said in the LinkedIn request, I want to learn more about Austin.
Mhm.
And it looks like you've lived there a really long time. Would you be willing to talk to me? And I don't think that I even looked at your profile at that point. I think I was like, sure, yeah, I'll talk to you. And here we are, whatever, 6 months, 7 months later, and we talk all the time, and I'm thankful for that. I think your point is good for those that are just starting out, and also in corporate America, it's really important when you go to ask people to spend time with you that you're clear on and you're direct on what you want out of the relationship. And it's not that, back to your point of being one-sided, it doesn't have to be all about you, but you want to bring value to that relationship as well. But just to say, hey, I want to chat with you, people generally may not have time for that. Back to your point about people are busy.
Yeah.
Uh,
And people don't owe me anything. And I understand that. And so for individuals like yourself at that time to give me some of your time meant a lot then. And it means even more now because of how we've developed our friendship over time.
yeah.
And as I mentioned, I definitely wouldn't have been able to do certain things without your support. And you've also opened up some doors for me that I'm really grateful for.
And same here. You've done the same for me. That's what friendship is. Okay, so how often should you reach out to people in your network? Like, if you just wait, and I think this is same for friendship too. If you just wait to when you need something or you have a question, does that make the relationship more transactional? So, are you intentional about how often you're reaching out to your core people?
Yeah, I think you always want to make touch points. I don't necessarily set time aside for that with people in Austin because I've been going back so frequently. And I look at like this image of a sand sifter. And when you have this sand, and then, at the end of it, there's like a handful of diamonds. And when I look at it from just LinkedIn versus a place like Austin that I'm making connections with, like those diamonds are the ones that I'm like nurturing and developing because not every single person is going to be somebody that's going to be in your core network. And so it also takes self-awareness to know who are those people that are going to stay within your network
Mhm.
and who are those people that are going to be transactional.
Yeah.
Because I'm also self-aware enough to know and then to not take it personally if somebody comes to me and just has a question or they have a favor. I'm the type that's fine. If you have a question, you need a connection or whatever, that doesn't bother me. But so I'd say pretty regularly here when I'm in Albuquerque to really see people that are supporting you. And then I think at the end of the day, it is important to maybe once every 2 weeks or once a month to also write down who are the people that have had made an impact in your life, why that is, and setting time aside to just touch base.
Oh, I think that's really good. So, back to the question around quality versus quantity, the quantity is there, the quality and the nourishing will be will be less, obviously. And so it's not like you're having to reach out to 1,000 people every single week. You're really honing in on the diamonds versus the sand. I like that a lot. And spending time making sure your relationships are solid there. Yeah, that's really good. What do you think are some common mistakes people make when they're networking, and how can they avoid them?
They look at it with the mindset of what's in it for them instead of
Mm,
what's in it for the other person.
yeah.
And I think that just takes time and maturity, but that can be a mistake. And then also not understanding the why behind it. So going back to the intentionality, and then figuring out a way to make everything a win-win. So there's like different layers to it, or at least that's how I see it in my mind. I've been intentional about making connections for so long in different areas of my life that I don't have to think about it. And it's just something that I just know intrinsically of how really genuine friendships and business relationships operate.
Mhm.
So going back to the mistakes, going in it with the mindset of what's in it for me instead of what's in it for them, not knowing what the ask is, and then follow through. Follow through is really important, whether you're setting up a meeting or after the fact. And then once that relationship is developed, following through like on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis, just to let the other person know that you're still around.
Yeah. You haven't ghosted them.
No.
One of the things I think you're really good at is in that whole what's in it for me versus what's in it for you is asking open-ended questions.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to add that as a tip for people that they're like, how do I demonstrate that
Oh,
I am there for them too? And I think you are really good at you're bold, let me say that, and asking provocative questions too that aren't just surface, right? That are meaningful conversation to have. And I think that's a skill set that people can develop. And then actually listening to what the person's saying and then
yes.
asking follow-up questions. But I think learning the skills of having a real conversation is something people can do if they want to build real relationships in their network.
Active listening is really important. And I think one of the ways, you didn't ask me this, but I think that one of the ways that I've been able to develop that, weirdly enough, has been my experiences in physical therapy, which is so like maybe left field, but because I've worked one-on-one with my physical therapist, I've been able to have those just like conversations.
Yeah,
And I've just noticed the past few times, like last year, I was going to occupational therapy and then I was doing aqua therapy. I think this might have been before you and I even started talking. I was doing aqua therapy and just how quick I was able to develop just like relational like friendships
yeah,
with those therapists because I was working one on one and they were getting to know me and I was getting to know them. But I think, and this is actually the first time I've realized this, that my physical therapy helped me in more ways than one. But I think that's I developed my active listening skills.
yeah. Because I think at the end of the day, when my last job in corporate America was in inclusion and diversity and equity, at the end of the day, everyone just wants to be seen.
Yes.
So I think when you show up, and you choose to be present with people, that's recognized as real humanity. You're not
Yes.
distracted. You're not, and I think that's a key if you want to build a real authentic relationship with someone is you have to actually be there. It's step one. But I think you're really good at asking really, especially in those first couple times that we met, you didn't just ask about Austin, you also asked about me and my experience in Austin, and you asked really good open-ended questions that allowed me to tell you my opinion, which everybody also wants to share their opinions. I think those are really good tips to make it successful. Okay, let's see. How do you stay motivated to network when it feels like it's not yielding immediate results, as in
Hmm.
yesterday?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yesterday. I think you just have to keep nurturing. For example, I'll just use the Austin, my experience when I got connected with the CEO of Leadership Austin last year. So it was like December, I think this way out, when I met her in person. And then back in February when I met her, no, back in December is when I met her virtually. And then in February, I met her in person. And then she had offered me the opportunity to go to the Leadership Austin conference. That didn't happen in our first virtual meeting. And it took some time, but the offer to go to the Leadership Austin conference was something that was unexpected. But my point is, you just never know what can happen with the connections. And, but also lowering your expectations, because I think that's also what keeps me motivated is not expecting anything from anybody, but just to, you look at like experiences that have yielded fruit. And for me to keep that in the back of my mind and to remember that when I am feeling unmotivated, to make those connections, but to know like at some point, those intentional connections that you're doing and those touch points, you're growing every single time you're making those connections and having conversations. So that's what keeps me motivated in those times.
Oh, that's cool. So it's about the experience itself.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And you're open to outcome.
And that's something that you have shared with me and that I have put on the forefront of my mind instead of the back of my mind, to be open to the outcome.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. So final thoughts on actionable tips. I want to start today. Where do I, if I'm just starting today, and we already talked about reaching out to your current
Mhm.
work, but what's one action somebody could take today?
One actionable step would be, I think, creating a LinkedIn account if you don't have one. It would, if you're adverse to that and you just want to do everything in real life, then I would suggest looking within your network, looking at Chamber of Commerce. And if you're bold enough, these are big. I'm going to hold off on that because these are big ideas. But I think the first step is to figure out the why and identify your network, because you could get to a place, and I'll just say it now, where if nothing is working within your network, then create your own event. Have people come to you instead of you going to them. So I think that's something that I read somewhere, is just have the courage to start something and then you bring people together.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And, in my years in corporate America, when somebody would ask me that question, like, how do I get started? I would say, identify who you want to have a cup of coffee with, ask, because everybody has 15, 20 minutes.
Yes.
I think when we set out on something like building a network or changing our careers, we think about the big stuff and we get overwhelmed almost immediately. So if
Mhm.
we take the first small step, I think that's really good advice. And so, as we wrap up, any final words of wisdom? And again, the reason I wanted to have this discussion with you is one of the many impressive traits of the Travis Davis that I've come to learn and know over these last few months is your boldness, your ability to make connections with people, your willingness to make connections with people that both benefit them and yourself. So, any final words of wisdom?
I think you have, I think I appreciate all those words, and they definitely ring true to me because you've you haven't known me for a long time. And I think that is what makes this like conversation really valuable because you're forming your own opinion of me from nobody else. And so that's what makes it genuine and real. And so I appreciate all the time that you've poured into me and all the conversations that we've had up to this point. And yeah, it just takes one person to open up new doors and new opportunities. And as I mentioned before, Michelle's been seeing this in real time of my journey and what I'm trying to accomplish. So whether you have 10 people, 100 people, or just one person in your network, just start with one person and then see where that goes.
Love it. Okay, that's a wrap for my hosting of Off the Crutch. It was super fun, so I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be on the other end. And I hope we can do something of the sort sometime soon again. This was fun.
Yeah, and just for your listeners, this started with me saying, Travis, you should write a book on how to network. So I stand behind that, by the way, on how to network from Travis Davis. You can rename it though, whatever you want it to be.
We'll I'll get my TEDx talk out of the way, and then we'll get the book. And then what did you say to me a couple weeks ago that I'll be ready to take over the world? Yeah. So
Ready to take over the world. Some
awesome.
of the time too.
Yes.
That's a different podcast.
That is a very different podcast. Oh, thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you, Travis.